The 1990s were a fascinating time for video games. The technology was progressing in a rapid way, players' experiences were expanding into the third dimension, and the creativity and imagination of developers in both carving out new genres and their own identities as companies was quite apparent. At the time, the first-person shooter genre had largely been limited to the PC, and many were trying to emulate the success of Doom and Wolfenstein 3D. Many were convinced at the time that the genre wouldn't translate well to home consoles. Yet that notion was broken with the most unlikely video game, a licensed shooter based on a 2-year-old film that used the most awkward video game controller yet. James Bond had had several titles even before the mid-90s in video games, but nothing had been really noteworthy. After a prolonged development at Rare, including a key ingredient being added in quite late, Goldeneye 007 for the N64 was finally released in the fall of 1997. It did alright sales-wise that year, but based on word of mouth and excellent rental figures, it eventually became the third best-selling game on the platform, outselling titans like Pokémon Stadium, Super Smash Bros., and even the towering achievement that is Ocarina of Time. Ever since its release, other first-person shooters have been inspired by and borrowed liberally from various design elements and features of GoldenEye, including Medal of Honor, Call of Duty, Halo, and of course later Bond games. There's no denying the legacy of this icon, and its competition pool for the title of Best Bond video game ever is quite small. Despite this, it took over 25 years before it was legally available for another console again. And not for a lack of trying. In 2006, the game was being discussed for a possible Wii Virtual Console release, but nothing ever came of that. Later in 2008, the game was being remastered for the Xbox Live Arcade and would have featured things like new graphics, smoother frame rate, and online multiplayer. However, because we can't have nice things and legal issues continuously loom over almost all aspects of the Bond franchise like a bad X, this remaster was shelved despite being almost fully completed. So it was with the greatest of relief for me when a re-release of the game was unveiled in late 2022 for the Nintendo Switch Online and Xbox Games Pass. I'm primarily an Xbox gamer, and so I was ecstatic. However, the trailer made it sound like it was going to be a subscription-based only release, and so I desperately searched to see if there was any hope of owning the game outright. Well, I found that if you owned the digital version of Rare Replay, you would receive the game as a free download. Even though I already owned Rare Replay in a physical format, I immediately went online and repurchased the game for $8 with no second thoughts. Now, it may sound silly to buy a games compilation twice just to own one new entry, but I had eagerly spent $15 to own the re-release of Episode 1 Racer a few years back, and I was willing to spend at least $20 to buy this game separately. It is this Xbox re-release that I will be using for the basis of my review. Now, this re-release is not without its justifiable criticism. No online multiplayer for Xbox fans, bad initial control settings for the Switch, no standalone release for either system, a huge missed opportunity not to release the Xbox Live Arcade version, and being a straight port of the N64 version without any extra work to touch it up or to give it the red carpet treatment. Given the importance of this game for video game fans in general, and for Bond fans in particular, it's a crying shame this re-release seems to have almost been treated as an afterthought and not given some extra work to make it even more presentable. Yet none of that particularly weighed on me when I saw this game available for play on January 26, 2023, and I spent the next 2 days doing nothing but playing GoldenEye. And I came away with a greater appreciation for it than I ever had before. Now, I was already in love with the game. It came in at number 2 on my personal Bond games ranking, and like so many others, I've spent many hours in both its single-player and multiplayer offerings. But now that it had a control scheme that incorporated 2 analog sticks, and being many years older since the last time I gave this more than just a casual playthrough, I was inspired to play through the whole game again and legitimately unlock everything, since cheat codes wouldn't work here. That's right, I beat the game on 00 Agent, did all the time trials to unlock all the cheats, and got all of the achievements twice. Now, I'm not the most hardcore of gamers. I tremble to think of playing games like Halo on anything above normal difficulty, and I've avoided landmark games in the past because people talked about them as being unbeatable nightmares. So completionist playthroughs are not something I generally indulge in for a game. Nevertheless, I was so invigorated by the very fact that a long-awaited day had arrived that I personally thought would never come that I was only too happy to make these attempts. What I'm hoping to make clear with this review is that Goldeneye 007 is not a relic of its time, and you need to apply historical perspective in order to enjoy it. I genuinely think it's a timeless work, and this whole last year sharing the game again with my family and friends has been really eye-opening into how massive the appeal of the game can be. Even though I remain of the opinion that Everything or Nothing is the better Bond game because it better captures the feel of a Bond film, Goldeneye will continue to hold a special place in my heart, and I wanted to share in my joy a bit with you all. I also want to go about this review a little differently. I'm going to go through level by level, share my thoughts as we go, and even share some tricks that I've learned along the way to help make this game maybe a little bit easier and perhaps a little bit more fun for you. So with all that preamble out of the way, let's dive into the meat of Goldeneye 007. The opening always gets me pumped. With that iconic sound and the opening gun barrel, it's an instant rush of nostalgia for me. The sound design and music for this game is perhaps my favorite on the N64. While it does kind of bug me in hindsight that a lot of the tracks are just remixes of the Bond theme, I feel like we've been so starved of proper Bond theme usage in recent films that I was only too happy to have it blaring in my ears throughout the game, and boy does this game love its Bond theme. The main menu is simple and elegant. File dossiers to show different profiles, photographs to represent the levels, and text to communicate the story. One of the things I love most about this game is that with each escalation in the 3 difficulties, there can be additional objectives added. Some of these objectives are a bit vague once you get into the game, but I love that reading the dossier before the mission will often give you hints on what to do for these objectives. For the purpose of this review, I chose to play on Secret Agent. Like I've said, I've done 00 Agent a few times now, but I wanted to have a mix of challenge and power fantasy while I recorded the footage, and so that's why I picked Secret Agent. The Dam level is perhaps one of the most iconic opening levels in all of video games. The wide camera sweep gives you a good sense of the scale of the level and appropriately emulates sweeping tracking shots in cinemas. There aren't too many of these in Bond films, particularly in the opening pre-title sequences, but it's a nice way to tie this game back to its roots. You'll go through this level, opening gates, shooting alarm boxes, and maybe throwing a modem on a computer. One of the things that most impressed me about the development of this game is that the designers created the environments first and then placed the objectives later. This is a very counterintuitive design choice, as it can often lead to a lot of extra unused space. Yet I love how this weirdly makes the game more replayable. The environments might feature hidden paths, a powerful weapon, or some body armors, so the exploration of each of the levels is something worth doing. Once you hop off the dam, it's on to level 2, the facility. This is in contention with a few others for being my favorite level of the game. It expertly recreates the environment from the film and makes for a fine multiplayer map. Now is a good time to talk about those time trials. Each level has a time trial for a certain difficulty, with a corresponding cheat that it'll unlock. For example, Dam's time trial was on Secret Agent difficulty in 2 minutes 40 seconds or less. As a reward, you'll unlock the paintball mode cheat. For Facility, the trial is to beat it on 00 Agent in 2 minutes and 5 seconds or less, and you'd earn invincibility. And to me, this is the hardest of all the trials. Higher difficulties tend to remove the extra body armors that you could have picked up. Enemies' bullets are more accurate, and one of the objectives on this level relies on a bit of good luck. The objective is to speak with Dr. Doak. Dr. Doak is an NPC character who will randomly spawn in one of 7 locations, and several of them are a bit off the beaten path, meaning you cannot beat the level in time and meet up with him. So this level requires a lot of practice and good fortune. In fact, the Xbox version includes a stat that will tell you how many times you've attempted this level on 00 Agent. It took me at least 30 attempts before I finally beat this. The thing that I found was most helpful was that you can detonate remote mines in the air, and I used one in order to take out the 3 guards that are coming down this hallway. After that, it's on to the runway, which is one of the quickest and easiest of the levels. In fact, I would wager that the majority of players unlocked their first cheat while playing this level. The time trial is Agent in under 5 minutes, and I don't think I've ever taken more than 3 minutes to beat the level, even on 00 Agent. This is also the first appearance of the tank, which is such a fun thing to include this early on in the game. So far, the game has followed the structure of the movie, but now it takes a detour and does its own thing for a while. The next 2 levels are Surface 1 and Bunker 1. These have Bond traveling to Cervanaya, which is something he doesn't do in the film, in order to discover details about the Goldeneye satellite. What's unique about this pair is that both of the levels will return later, featuring different objectives, and the bunker is even expanded in scope for its second iteration. I prefer Surface 1 over Surface 2, simply because it's much easier to see. This is actually one of the levels where you are most likely to get lost, due to its lack of recognizable landmarks. But because I've played this game so many times over 20 plus years, I usually maintain a good sense of geography while playing this level. Bond then goes to a nuclear silo, and this is one of the more linear levels of the game. On higher difficulties, you're forced to do it as a bit of a speed run, as a timer will start to count down the moment you begin the level. My least favorite part always came towards the end, when Oromov appears with a host of guards. I always need to take a few of them out so I can proceed, but because Oromov keeps shooting at you and has so much health, it sometimes means he can pick me off if I'm not careful. Next comes the Frigate, another favorite level of mine. This level has some hostages for you to rescue, as well as some bombs to defuse and a helicopter you'll need to place a tracker on. I like the tension in this level, and the fact that you have to rescue more of the hostages as you go up in difficulty. Now, it's pretty easy to get lost in this environment because it's a labyrinth of a stage, but there is a logic to it, and with a few playthroughs, you'll start to get your bearings. Now we've hit the second pair of Cervanaya levels, and Surface 2 is quite possibly my least favorite level, though it's still a fun one to play through. Bunker 2 can get a little tricky, as you now have a hostage who has a death wish, Natalia. I do love that Bond escapes using the magnetic watch, which is a nice callback to Live and Let Die, and it confirms for me that these developers are fans of the series. Once you get out of your cell, it's imperative you keep Natalia locked up until you've cleared out the bunker. This level is one of the harder ones of the game, and that's because there are stealth mechanics at play. If you shoot more than about 2 or 3 shots from an automatic gun at a time, guards will start running in from the adjacent areas in droves. So take your time and pick them off one by one with either some karate chops or some small burst fire. If you need some help, there are some throwing knives in the cell area that you can pick up with your magnetic watch, and these will take out the guards silently. On to the Statue Park. This is another maze of a level like the Frigate, and so of course I love it. It's got such a cool atmosphere and the music is absolutely wonderful. Just take it for granted that the least of the tracks in this game are still bangers. Now, the general consensus all over the internet is that this is one of the hardest time trials, Secret Agent in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. And I won't disagree with that exactly, it's just I've never found this one to be as particularly painful as some of the others. The key is to know when you can leave the 2 conversations with the NPCs that you'll have during this level. The reveal of Alec is the one where you can shave off the most time, as once the text appears that you've completed the objective, start bolting for the helicopter, don't wait to finish the conversation. You'll also have to pick up a black box that is ejected from the helicopter explosion, which can spawn in a few different places. Though because it's a relatively small area to search, and if you're lucky you can actually see where it pops up, I've never had that much difficulty with this one. Bond and Natalia are framed by Alec for the explosion of the helicopter, and thus it's off to the archives. This is another really difficult time trial, as you have to beat it in 1:20 on 00 Agent. The way that I did this was to not worry about any of the guards past the first room and just speed ran the place. Do a few practice runs on some lower difficulties so that you know the route to take, and remember that Natalia just needs to see you when you get to her room. You don't need to enter in and take care of the guards. If you do this right, you'll have no guards following you into the room with Mishkin, which is the most agonizing part of the level, as his conversation is mandatory to listen to until he gives you the key. This level took me so many tries to do, and is one of my least favorite to go back to, right up there with Facility and Caverns. The streets are up next, with the tank as an option. Now, you can do this just by running through on foot, and it's fine, but it feels like a crying shame if you don't use the tank, since this level was built with it in mind. This is an explosive stage, and I mean that both in a good way and a bad way, as there are mines to watch out for, rocket launchers to contend with, and civilians to not run over. Most of the time I can do this just fine, but sometimes the AI just decides it wants to piss me off and will throw a civilian running in front of me and I accidentally run him over. There's a cool secret area if you want some even more explosive fun. As you go off to talk to Zukovsky, there are a few guards shooting through some windows in a building. If you run at the correct window, you'll pass through and find a handy weapon and more body armor. The depot is your next port of call, and while this isn't the hardest of the levels by any stretch of the imagination, I found the fixed gun emplacement next to a couple of the objectives to be the biggest pain in my butt. This is the one area where I say it probably would have been better to play this on the N64, as that controller had some C-strafing buttons that allowed you to pop out from behind a corner to take a few shots at something. For the Xbox, this is simply a matter of practice, and I found I had more luck working from the left side of the containers. The train is another iconic level, and actually beats out the silo for being probably the most linear of the levels. What's nice about it is that unlike some of the other levels, there are a set number of guards and they will always be in the same place, so it's a bit less of a chore to memorize this level for your harder playthroughs. The 00 Agent difficulty has an added objective of having Natalia crack Boris's code, but you will not be given enough time to achieve that unless you do something else first. When you head into the room with Ourumov, align yourself with him and Xenia in such a way that you can easily shoot at her as well. If you hit her after getting Ourumov, you'll be given something like an extra 20 seconds so that you can have Natalia crack the code. I also adore that you get to use the laser watch to go through the panel on the floor to escape the train like the film. This game has done a pretty good job of using gadgets throughout, several of which were pulled from the Roger Moore films, and this is my favorite example. In the remake that was released for the 7th generation consoles, you had to shoot through the panel to escape the burning train. While you can do that here, it's way more fun to use the laser watch. Finally, you'll come to the last set of story missions, which take place in Cuba, where Bond follows Trevelyan to stop the Goldeneye satellite. The first mission is Jungle. Jungle is another contender for my favorite level of the game. It's a tense mission with hardly any music, guards with some of the most lethal weapons, and suicidal Natalia to protect. She can at least somewhat help in this level, but you still have to keep your eye on her. It's such an eerie location, and I love how vulnerable I feel while traversing the area. Even on Agent, I've got to be on my toes. Xenia shows up for a boss fight, and she can be tough if you don't have the right weapon or give yourself enough room between you and her. Once she goes down, you'll soon be upon what is, for my money, the most aggravating part of the level, the area leading to the elevator. What I hate about this part is that all the guards have assault rifles, some of them like to throw grenades, and they infinitely respawn until you get to the elevator. I found that using my auto aim to take out some of the guards and then sprinting to the finish is my preferred way of getting to the end. You then move on to the Control, a legendarily hard level. You've got fixed gun emplacements, grenade throwers, and a horde of guards now gunning for Natalia as well as you. This was the level I most dreaded growing up, but I figured out a few things to make this one far less stressful. First, you have to clear out the area once you get off the starting elevator, and the higher difficulties will throw in some fixed guns. If you memorize where the gun emplacements are, you can place yourself in advantageous areas to take them out. The first is the hardest, though I found that staying in the elevator and shooting the camera works the best. The second gun is actually far enough away that you can shoot at it without it realizing you're there, so long as you hug this wall. The third is the easiest. One of the things I most love about the Xbox re-release is that the controls are fairly intuitive. On the N64 version, crouching was something I almost never did because I think you had to hit 2 buttons in order to make it work. On the Xbox, you'll just hit B and you crouch. This will be very useful for these next set of missions. Once you get to the main control area, make sure to follow Boris upstairs once he runs off. He'll lead you to an area with some body armor that you'll definitely need for this next section. Now you've reached what is probably the single hardest thing to do in the main story missions: protect Natalia as she brings down the Goldeneye satellite. For years, I stayed on the ground floor, hoping that I would be fast enough to shoot the guys coming through the glass. Well, there's actually a better way. Go to the second floor, stand in the section in front of the stairs behind the glass square, and prioritize killing the guys without the hats. Those are the ones that go for Natalia, and they only come up from the top floor. The rest of the guys will all go up to the second floor to try to get you. As long as you prioritize killing the hatless guys, Natalia will never be in harm's way. Down into the depths of the caverns. It's a fairly straightforward level on Agent, but gets substantially harder on higher difficulties, as you now have to blow up certain computers without killing the scientists, and venture into the areas with the fixed gun emplacements. Something I never noticed until recently is that certain weapons like the assault rifle have penetrating bullets. Keep this in mind when you're shooting the guards in one of the last areas, as there are gas canisters behind them that will easily blow up and cause you to fail an objective or two. The final level of the main story, the Cradle, is an amazingly epic final showdown, and part of that is the impeccable music. This is my favorite of the entire soundtrack, and I always stop to do some headbanging whenever this song comes up. No matter the difficulty, you just have the 2 objectives: destroy the override console and settle the score with Trevelyan. 3 hints to make this second objective easier. First, remember that there are 4 body armors dotted around the level, with 3 of them being located on the arms like from where you started from. The second, after you destroy the override console and leave the shed, don't stop at the top of the ramp to shoot Alec. Go over to the fence and shoot him in the head from over the side. He won't be able to fire at you when you're in this position. The final hint is when you get to that little platform beneath the cradle. When you jump down, make sure you turn around towards the ladder and crouch. This means Trevelyan will need a little bit of extra time to get into position to shoot you, and if you're quick with the trigger, this is all the time you'll need. The level then ends with a cutscene showing Bond jumping to grab the helicopter and flying off. For a laugh, play this mission with the fast animation cheat turned on and watch what happens. So that's the main story completed, with a ridiculously long and unskippable credits roll. But we're not done yet. If you beat all of the levels on Secret Agent, you'll unlock Aztec as a bonus level. This is my favorite of the 2 unlockable levels, but it is by far the hardest in the game. First, the guards all have assault rifles or Moonraker lasers, and several of the early guards love their grenades. Second, there are the dreaded fixed gun emplacements. Third, Jaws has so much health, as well as having 2 assault rifles. Finally, once you beat Jaws, guards will start spawning in infinitely until you complete the level. I have 3 tips to help you out here. First, when you get to this main area, remember that the Moonraker laser will shoot through the boxes, so use them as cover to take out the gun emplacements and some of the guards. Second, get Jaws out of his opening area into the area with the 2 sets of stairs and use them to your advantage. Jaws cannot stop and shoot across the gap if he's going up or down the stairs, so use that opportunity to pelt him with your laser. Finally, once you've started the final countdown for the shuttle, don't even think about staking it out on the ground floor. Find a good spot to hide until the timer runs out. I find that the area just above the shuttle with the console works the best. The second and final unlockable level is the Egyptian Temple, which you unlock by beating all of the levels, including Aztec, on 00 Agent. You'd be forgiven for thinking this would be a really hard level, but you'd be wrong. As long as you know the floor puzzle needed to get to the golden gun, and are fast enough in the duels with Baron Samedi, this is actually a pretty quick level. The tile puzzle is probably the most unfair thing in the game, as I couldn't find anything within the game itself to give you an idea of the pattern you need to walk, and if you make one mistake, it'll set off the drone guns. So, here's a picture of what you need to do. You then have to defeat Baron Samedi with the golden gun. The first two showdowns are pretty easy, but the third one may take some work. Fortunately, there is some body armor in this room, so use that to your advantage. A few thoughts on these unlockable levels. I absolutely adore that they are here and how they both pay tribute to the Roger Moore era, which must have been this team's favorite era given the assortment of non-GoldenEye movie gadgets in the single-player levels, and the fact that these two levels pay homage to each of the first 4 Roger Moore films. Both also feature boss fights with iconic henchmen that might be unkillable if you go by their films. Jaws' inclusion here is genius, and it makes sense to include him as a boss battle since he was part of the Moonraker film. Baron Samedi is a little odd though, given that he was based in the Caribbean area and had no association with Scaramanga. So why would he be in an Egyptian temple with the golden gun? Despite this crazy leap in logic, I do love creating a somewhat pointless level that gives you an excuse to use the most powerful gun in the game, and it's purely there for us Bond fans, so I'm not going to bite the hand that feeds me. Plus, Samedi's laugh is a bit creepy, so you get to bring in a little bit of the spooky atmosphere from Live and Let Die. Once you beat every level, including Egyptian on 00 Agent, you'll unlock 007 difficulty, which is a sandbox kind of mode where you can adjust various stats to make the levels as easy as you want or as hard as humanly possible. I do end up playing this quite a bit, as it's an excellent reward for putting in the time and effort to beat the game, and it only adds to the replayability. And now we come to the iconic multiplayer mode. While I personally believe that the single player is just as good as the multiplayer, there is no denying that this mode is the reason the game is still fondly talked about outside of Bond fan circles. It's a relatively simple setup. You can have up to 4 players, you pick your scenario, you choose a level, pick a weapon set, select your characters, and you're off to the races. Yet, I think it was because of the simplicity of the mode that it appealed to so many people as a casual pick-up-and-play experience. The N64 did wonders for bringing the idea of multiplayer to casual audiences. Alongside Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros., this was the game to own for parties, since you only needed a console, a TV, 4 controllers, 1 copy of the game, and you are set. I too have spent countless hours playing this mode as well, and I have loads of memories about the multiplayer, and not all of them from the distant past. I actually brought my Xbox Series X to a family reunion recently, and this was the game of choice for multiplayer, even amongst people who weren't even alive when the game was initially released. It was a really special moment for me to get to share this wonderful game with my nieces and nephews and see them get just as into it as I did back in the day. We had access to Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. On the Switch, Halo, Old School Battlefront 2, and Call of Duty Black Ops, and yet this was the most popular game for that entire week. A few final thoughts on some of the other aspects of the game. Despite the constant mentions throughout this review, I don't feel like I've praised the music highly enough. Graham Norgate and Grant Kirkhope both deserve a lot of thanks for deciding to go as hard as they did here, and there's not a dud amongst all the tracks. I've already mentioned that the music for The Cradle is my favorite of the whole game, but there are plenty of other awesome tracks. The Watch menu, which gives the hardest trap beat of 1997, Aztec with its almost sci-fi-esque tension, Control with its groovy bass, Frigate with its ominous start, and the clever use of the Bond theme throughout a lot of the tracks. This is just an amazing offering, and I personally believe it's a much better score than Eric Serra's for the Goldeneye film. The shooting mechanics are buttery smooth for the era. There is an auto-aim here, but it's not so generous that there's no skill involved, and the simple act of shooting weirdly feels so pleasing. On the N64 controller, there was a Z trigger on the back which felt like an immersive choice for the shooting mechanics, and that probably helps. I do think the idea of snipers that move around while you're looking through the scope came from here, so Goldeneye is actually the source of one of my biggest frustrations with modern first-person shooters. The map design is quite astounding for the era, and particularly in the multiplayer. The temple, facility, and the bunker were all favorites of mine. It never felt like there was just one main area that everybody congregated into, and it was very easy to get lost in the halls, and it made for some really exciting sessions. Proximity mines are probably the source of so many broken friendships over the years, but I can't deny it's still incredibly funny to see someone's day, including my own, ruined just by taking a wrong turn. So, that's my in-depth look into this classic James Bond game. If you were to talk about Goldeneye now, plenty of people will bring up that it's not aged well. The graphics are quite ugly by today's standards, the control scheme on the N64 version is awkward, and the design of the game is too simplistic to ever compete with modern shooters. While those are all true to some degree, the fact is that as time goes on, I've put less and less stock into those criticisms. I feel like it's generally pointless to compare these graphics with more modern games because it's a losing battle a lot of the time, and it's not really the older game's fault. There are only a few titles where I think the graphics have aged beautifully, like Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. The re-release on the Xbox was actually the gateway for me to get past the limitations of the N64 controller, but even on that original system, you'll find that it still works reasonably well, much like it does with Mario 64 or Star Fox 64. As for the design of the game, the team consisted of so few people, with most of them never having made a game before. The game was made in the mid-90s, which often meant that limited hardware capability impeded the developers' ambitions. Fun fact, most of the game's color palette is white, black, and gray. And yet, it's remarkable how this game still feels like a fairly expansive and complete experience even now. And I've come to love the open nature of most of the levels and how the game wonderfully retains its fun factor even after I've memorized where all of the guards are in a particular level. Beating Goldeneye on story mode is a blast, but completing it is another matter entirely. The 00 agent difficulty can be brutal on the last few levels, particularly the caverns and the Aztec. Some of the time trials are pretty unforgiving, like on Statue Park or the Archives. And on the Xbox version of the game, the difficulty achievements don't stack, meaning you cannot beat the game on 00 agent and expect to get the achievements for agent and secret agent at the same time. You have to go through the game 3 times in order to get all the achievements. Yet I was determined, and I'm so proud to have 100%ed the game twice. I keep returning to the game now because it's easily accessible on my main console of choice, the controls are more intuitive, and because I'm gaining a new appreciation for it all the time. It's still not my favorite game ever, nor is it even my favorite Bond game. It's not a game where every second is like walking on holy ground, and you're bound to find something you don't like now. I personally still stand by some of my own personal gripes. Speedrunning the game goes against many of its strengths, and the controls aren't really suited for that style of play. Several of the objectives are agonizingly vague, and later Bond games do a better job at conveying their stories. Yet this is a game where it's really hard to go against the grain. I personally still think we are waiting to see the Arkham Asylum entry for the Bond series, the one that so encapsulates everything about the character that we love, tells a rich story, and is a game that manages to be equally fun in all of its modes. Goldeneye and Everything or Nothing come close in a lot of those areas, but if we could somehow mesh those games together and add that rich and layered story, I think we'd have that perfect game. Until then, I'm happy to keep replaying this beloved classic. GoldenEye 007 is probably the most famous and well-regarded piece of extra media for the Bond franchise outside of the films themselves, and it's been a genuine pleasure to re-immerse myself in its world this last year. Now let's get that Xbox Live Arcade version released officially, dang it.